She will present today on Cedric Price, titled Too Much Architecture, and please join me in welcoming Samantha.
Big afternoon, a lot to cover. I'm in a slightly strange, giddy moment because, as Kim just mentioned, the large pile of paper over there that was published only a week ago, and it was the first time I saw the books last Wednesday. So it's still very, very fresh and strange feeling. I started the project in 2009, so it's been quite a long time in the making. But I won't talk about that specifically now. I'll maybe speak a little bit more about that later. But in that context, it's a slightly... I was wondering about what to speak about today, because it covers so much. And there are so many, as you will, the afternoon will unfold, there are so many ways into talking about Cedric Price and looking at his work. So I decided to speak about the thing that I love the most and that I still enjoy after working on the work for 7 years, and in fact longer. I've worked on the work for nearly 30 years, but I still get pleasure from looking at the drawings, and so I wanted to speak about his drawing and a particular aspect of his drawing, which is the cartoon. I did do a book briefly with Cedric when he was still alive, which was published in 2003. And in that process, he said, you know, the minute you get bored, you stop doing this. You don't do it if it doesn't bring pleasure to doing this. So there were moments where I thought, okay, maybe but boredom is not one of them. So I kept going. So too much architecture. This is not a very attractive slide, but the important bit on it is the Snoopy cartoon, which I think is universally known. But it was a photocopy in the files of Fun Palace. So one day it drops out, and I think, hooray! After weeks of looking through lots of folders, and then this is a big clue. So you can read the cartoon. It talks about the baseball, and you know, you keep using it, it breaks. And so this is what is called planned obsolescence. So everything about Cedric's work, for me, is embodied in this cartoon. It explains everything. So we could stop right now, actually, and go on to the next speaker, but I won't. I don't know how to use this. What do I do next? Just take the rest. That one. Okay. So this is the important slide, drawn not by Cedric but a member of his office, Keiichi Seiki, for a project that was later in the career called Magnet, done in the early 90s. On the left-hand side is Keiichi's drawing, a sketch of a part of a project. So he does the drawing in the office one day. Then in the night time, Cedric comes and, like many practices, he comes and he puts tracing over the drawings. And in the morning, Keiichi comes in and it has Cedric's notes over the top. Lovely sketch, but too much architecture. So this says a lot about Cedric. These words of warning are fundamental to recall when looking over any one of Price's projects, throwing light on both his design philosophy and his singular approach to drawing types employed at the different stages of his design process. This presentation now will follow the variations in Price's line, his drawn line, according to his own set of drawing types and across a selection of projects. So I'm not going to focus on one particular project, it goes across several different ones. Serving to characterize his unique appetite for and skill in executing the depiction of architectural ideas, and most importantly, always done with good humor. So this is also an important drawing, not drawn by Cedric, but by his friend Frank Newby, who was his engineer, long-standing collaborator, who worked on pretty well all of Cedric's projects with him. Well, in fact, Cedric had made drawings of himself actually prior to this. This is Cedric's self-portrait as a younger man. I'm not sure whether he did this actually after this one. I think he liked to think he was a bit better looking in this one. But this is the one that stays, and often many of his correspondence to his friends and clients is signed off with not sometimes a C, but often a portrait of Cedric. It speaks volumes about the kind of person he was. The British are very good at taking themselves not very seriously. Often, maybe in Cedric's case, because he thought if he got to the joke first, nobody could make a joke about him. So perhaps that's how he wielded the use of the cartoon. But let's just sideways for a moment. My work, as I said before, has been much about looking across the whole of his oeuvre, as much about pursuing an interest in drawing. And my aim is really to dispel one of the myths, an urban myth that has surrounded Cedric, mostly from his own cohort. And this is what I've discovered, is the people from his own era that he grew up with during the 50s and 60s, particularly in the UK. Again, it relates to this way of getting to the joke first before the joke is on you. But Cedric it was often a criticism that he couldn't draw. He just couldn't draw. So I think that's rubbish. And so in hopefully looking at some of these drawings we'll discover that. So he drew a vast range, but I think the use of the cartoon particularly is a fascinating one. Volume 1 of that over there opens with a quote from an obituary in The Spectator, which is a magazine in Britain in 1978, that Price wrote about his friend and cartoonist, a man called Nicholas Bentley. And he wrote about his friend: his drawings always extended the prose, even when it was his own, rather than merely clarifying it. Never using two lines when one would do, the mere addition of two dots, eye pupils, could introduce a whole range of human reflexes into an otherwise natural pudding face. Well, I think Price might well have been sort of describing himself or his own caricature and self-portrait, which he managed to capture in a very few deliberate lines. His most distinctive features, his kind of slick-backed hair, which he cut himself always, went to a barber, he cut his own hair. Always little small smiling eyes, or sad ones possibly, and always with his mouth clamped on a cigar, which is that thing coming out. So he aspired really to be as good as his friend Nicholas Bentley, a cartoonist. He wasn't aspiring to be a great, well, this is controversial, he wasn't aspiring to be a great architect. Well, of course he was, but through his drawing, certainly his friend Nicholas. So the next big clue for me, after looking at the cartoons or being faced with the cartoon self-portrait, was this piece of paper, which again, the sheer joy of going to the CCA and looking through files and lots, I mean, Kim explained how many pieces of paper there are, and then finding the ones that, this is helpful, this is a clue, which is describes reasons for Cedric's drawings. It's a sort of he sets himself a set of terms for his drawing types. So at the top you have what he says thinks in head drawings, primary sketches, reminders to oneself, drawings in his little notebooks, a kind of form of personal visual literacy developed as a design tool, and as I said, most frequently referred to as cartoons. Then you have in-house drawings, where those three little heads are talking to each other. Development and refinement of selected in-head drawings. So kind of drawings that follow an exchange within the office. Then you have two categories there, a kind of crowd of little people and a spade in the cement or in the ground, which are in-action drawings. So that's another set of drawings produced by the office which are about site and working on site and translating the ideas drawings into working drawings to build with. And then at the bottom, with the book and the clock, are the in forward-minded retrospective drawings, hence the title of the book. And these are post-mortem drawings, always a way of tracing reflections and being self-critical of one's own work. And this is a practice and a form. There's an arrow linking the top and the bottom. And this was really a process that Cedric did rigorously throughout his practice. He never presented a final project and that was done. They always come back in the form of magazine articles or in other working drawings where he takes any one of those categories and then comments upon it himself. So it was really, really important and exciting moment to find that he'd done a lot of the thinking, actually, for me, in terms of how to figure out how to order a huge number of projects and kind of try to track that process of thinking through drawing. There's just a little bit of a close-up of those categories. He writes of his own methodology, and this is Price writing on Price. Price considers drawing as both design tools and, I think it's up here, Price considers drawing as both design tools and as communication forms, requiring varying degrees of visual literacy from the users. He has no interest in establishing a syntactic graphic sense. There is indeed a syntax. It is simply one of Price's own invention. So all the drawings I'll show lie, for this purposes of this conversation, in that kind of in-head or in retrospective state. So let's move to here. In a review, this is it's another statement from Cedric about drawing. He described in a review of, he was looking around the student exhibition of student drawings at the AA in '77, and he remarks about what he's looking at on the walls. And the methods of drawings rather than the skill of drawing have always seemed more important to me. Indeed, too often have I found the latter a self-directed trap. So he's always wondering about the use of a drawing at a certain moment and also the inclusiveness of a drawing. Not that all drawings will be useful for everybody, but he certainly hit on types of drawings that would communicate to more than just one, or certainly just to other architects. He really wasn't interested in other architects. Most of his friends, in fact he didn't really have any friends. He had one friend, good friend, who was an architect. But perhaps, again, that's what prompted this kind of evolution of a different kind of drawing. This is a project from when he was a student at Cambridge in 1955. They were allowed to do a one-day esquisse. So it was, you could be let off the leash and do whatever you wanted. So at the time he was brought up in the 1930s, 40s, and his father used to take him, Cedric, and his brother out to do watercolor painting often. So that's really where he learned about drawing. This is from his father, who was also an architect. And so this is very much about landscape. It's a landscape watercolor, but in the middle there is an aviary. Those little boxes it's a design for an aviary. And then the bit that I really like, and of course he privileges the watercolor, and the orthogonal drawings are tiny along one side, but he peoples the drawing. And this is as a third-year student of architecture, and already he's caricaturing the people in there. So there's this rather buxom lady leaning over looking at the water, and this old man with his hands in his pockets, who bizarrely looks a bit like Cedric as an older man. So how he knew he was going to look like that, I do not know. But that clearly gave him a lot of pleasure to start to think about who was going to be using his architecture. He also introduced, almost in the form of kind of graphic novel and again cartoon, again another one-day esquisse about designing a hut for an archaeologist, but he designs it as a kind of sequence of drawings. So it's never about the single object, but it's about the making of it and the dismantling and the repositioning of it, and extremely economical with his line. So this is sort of a series of vignettes. How am I doing for time? I've got 5 minutes. Okay, I have to go really fast then. So you're going to get a speedy flavour. Okay, this was the essence of cartoon is brevity. I'm not doing well with brevity right now. You can see there's too much to say. So we'll really hone it. Brevity. Brevity of making. It's quick to make a drawing. Takes a long time in the making, but it's quick to make the drawing. And the brevity of consumption. It's very quick to read. This is actually this was Rayner Banham's idea to describe the evolution of the city as an egg, but Cedric actually drew it for him, which I'm afraid Banham has now been forgotten. It's now become Cedric's drawing, and possibly Cedric's idea. But it's important to probably know. Generally speaking, cartoons tend to caricature people or satirize or characterize people, situations and conditions, a political move or event, a shift in social habits. And Price he does use cartoon in that way, but he also uses it to imbue his architectural ideas and his buildings and his designs with individualized characteristics and behaviors. So quite often things that he draws think also. So they have a life of their own and a thought of their own. And he also, the little people at the bottom, this is also a motif if you get to look at more of his drawings, he often has an adult and a child in the drawing, and often the adult's going, look at this. So there's always a kind of a way that he's always trying to draw the viewer in it, but also at the same time he's thinking about who's going to be dealing with this. If it becomes a reality, who is going to have to cope with that? People. So these are emblems. So he's literally bringing life to inanimate objects, and that again reflects in the kind of inherently dynamic and sort of time-based agenda that underlies all of his designs. A drawing for Fun Palace, again, which is highly animated, and clearly before animation. Well, animation of course existed, but not certainly as a tool for architectural offices to deploy. But he was doing his best with the minimum of means to try to communicate the potential of that. And again, with few lines. For Pottery's Think Belt, even more in the kind of form of the graphic novel, I would say. This was a cover for a magazine to communicate the project. From the inside, you're sitting inside the driver's seat of a train. There's always a person to give scale. Always there's a sense of a moment in time there. Emblematic of a kind of ephemeral nature of architecture, indeterminacy, planned obsolescence, all the terms that will come up, I'm sure, later on. Another very well-known drawing of Pottery's Think Belt, where the drawing, not so much cartoon, but where the drawing, again, is so much about the architecture, it barely touches the site. The drawing barely touches the site, it literally hovers above it. So the techniques are there. And then a drawing from his notebooks, much later than Pottery's Think Belt. This is sort of 20 years later, but you find these again and again in the notebooks where he's rethinking projects and ideas from way back, but finds ways to kind of distill that information to think about another project. So this was in relation to something called Ducklings, which is a much later project, but tries to their ideograms as much as cartoons. Think Grid, which is a sort of project in Detroit, which was sort of a consequence of Pottery's Think Belt, a way of introducing education into an area of Detroit which was massively changing in its population in the late 60s. And within one drawing, he's describing the kind of context of essentially white flight from Detroit, with some statistics about how often children are watching television, and the whole introduction of TV and media in education, and then the idea of literally parachuting in technology into what were essentially very deprived and very, very fractured very fractured place. So he tries always to squash as much information into one drawing with as little means. This is one of my favourites, which we were just seeing some of McApee in the exhibition at the Gulbenkian, where he tries, these are specifically for his client, a project about the construction site, which we'll hear more about, and how to really improve the conditions on construction sites. And his client, Alistair McAlpine, was presented with a set of photographs where essentially Cedric went round and just revealed to him the kind of horror of what was going on. So, where were you when it dropped? Essentially the place looks like a bomb site, it really is. And then there's a huge pile of boots, which is what all the Irish navvies would come and just pull whatever boots they could off the pile. And he was saying, fantastic boot sale, all sizes available. But by making jokes, I'm going to finish now. By making the joke first, it opened up the design opportunity. It wasn't, his intention was never to, wear his heart on his sleeve. It was always to see the potential. No need to, we know what the misery is, so see the fun in it. I'm going to skip to one because now my time has run out. I have to leave some space for everybody else. I'm going to skip. I have to just show one more, which is Ducklings. This was a model made for, there's a project in Hamburg where Cedric proposes a series of bridges to traverse an area of former dockland where the docks are no longer there, and so he proposes to turn it into a resort, a place for birds, a bird sanctuary. But when the birds are gone, then people could come. So he designs a series of bridges so people can be in that place. When the birds come back, the bridges move away. And this is a bridge, one of the bridges he designed called Mudmobile. So it was a kind of walking bridge. It could walk in the mud. And his brother makes the model, and he doesn't like the model. He thinks it's horrible. It's not what he had intended at all. It's too military. It's just not, that wasn't the intention. So then Cedric makes a cartoon by collaging a photograph of the model and then draws, and makes these little bubbles come out of its back end, which I think is his way of saying, thanks, David, my brother, but no thanks. I'll conclude. I think Cedric could draw. I think it's really difficult to make drawings like this, and it's not part of our vocabulary so much right now. So I think that's something we could think about. Thank you.